Thank you for joining. Oh, look at that. Elena is on. Let me turn off my music. Hey, Elena.
Hey.
We did it.
This is not my medium, but I'm getting with it.
You're great. You're great. Well, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining our Monday meals. And then let's do a quick introduction. If you want to introduce yourself, let us know who you are. And today's topic is we're going to be talking about redistricting. We're just going to be talking about like we've landed on a final map and just some thoughts that we've had about the long process because Elena and through EastSide Arts Alliance was a big part of doing a lot of the outreach work. And we've been following along with the redistricting and talking to each other about it. And so I thought it'd be fun to bring Elena on to us to sort of like wrap up and talk a little bit about what we landed on the last map, the final map, and tell you all about, where we think this might lead for Oakland. So, but why don't we go ahead and have Elena introduce themselves?
So I am Elena Serrano, part of the collective that runs EastSide Arts Alliance and the EastSide Cultural Center, which is on International 23rd Avenue in the San Antonio district. Speaking of districts, and yes, I work really closely with amazing people, Dr. Charisma AC and her Outreach by Design and her urban planning students from UC Berkeley. It was a total team effort, and it was really a good process the whole process was very mixed up and down, but a good aspect was having these young planners, they're master's students to be planners, coming actually into the neighborhoods and working with the community. These are some of the future folks that are going to be running cities, and it's really important to kind of get off campus and down in the trenches with us. So it was great, and they were really amazing.
Yeah, that's great. And so I'm Liz Huck. I'm the executive director for Oakland Rising. I'm really excited to have you here. And this is called Monday Meals, and the reason we call it that is because a few years back I was running kind of this side hustle where I would be preparing meals, and then folks would pick it up on Monday and have it for lunch. And so we called it Monday Meals. And a kind of a side effect that happened as a result of that is that when I dropped it off or people picked it up, I got a chance to like check in with my people, see how they're doing and things like that. And then also as Elena and I'm connected through Elena through EastSide Arts Alliance. I used to work with them, and my kids grew up next door to EastSide Arts Alliance and spent a lot of time in the cultural center and being a part of the just in the space itself. And so and in itself. And so you could put it down right there. Thank you. Where was I going with this? Oh, and so sorry, my daughter is here with me today at the office today. And so so Monday Meals was an opportunity to like get together because, kind of old school way of doing things too and organizing. And I know that I've done this with Eastside. I've done it with a lot of other places, is that, you sit around with your people, with your comrades, and you talk about movement. You read together, you share together, you strategize together. And so that's what Monday Meals was, the idea around it was. And the other thing is that I don't think I've ever done that without food, right? And so, how do I do that with the people that I know and the people that I love, building movement with, building power with, and then over lunchtime. So this is lunchtime. My daughter just asked me right before I started this, what are we having for lunch? And I said, you think about it and tell me so we could go get it. But so what are you having for lunch, Elena? And then for those who are joining, put it in the chat. What are you having for lunch?
Well, I'm having lunch with my comrade, Greg Morizumi, one of the also founders of EastSide. Today is his birthday. Yay, happy birthday, Greg.
Happy birthday, Greg!
And if you remember 2 years ago on March 14th, that was the very last day things were open. Everything shut down, and we were having oysters in Old Oakland for his birthday. So, so we're gonna go back.
And Miss Ollie's.
No, next door.
Next door.
Oysters.
Okay.
We have to have oysters.
Okay. Well, for all of you should know that y'all should go to Miss Ollie's because you got about 2 weeks left because they are closing. So sad.
Oh, that
but
was
I know that
Friday meeting spot. I tried to have as many meetings on Fridays at lunchtime at Miss Ollie's as possible. That was.
Ooh, John is having shrimp and chicken pasta. What's up? Why don't I have any? Why aren't you sharing anything, John? That's John Bean. He's our deputy director. So, John, why aren't you sharing? But Elena, you and I need to go. We need to meet at Miss Ollie's soon so that we could, before that happens and closes. So let's get that on the books too. But I haven't decided what we're gonna have for lunch yet. The other thing that we do, that we ask everybody who joins us, is we ask, what are the ways that you're nourishing yourself? So I try not to think about it as self-care, because self-care always sounds like this one-off thing that you do rather than something that you do on a daily basis. And so I like to think of it as like nourishing our hearts, our minds, our spirits. So what are you doing to nourish yourself? My daughter just asked if she could have cup ramen. She just appeared and was like, hey, no, you cannot. So what are the ways that you are doing that? You can just share one or two.
Well, the time thing is really weird, with the time springing.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just trying to honor kind of not holding time so tightly, having it be a little more fluid and relaxed. It's been a strange process going through the plague and dealing with work and time and home, but yeah, I'm just trying to slow the clock down a little bit, or not think about it so much.
And you're getting a lot of hearts for that one. Look, everyone's throwing up hearts for that one, because I totally, when you said that, my whole body just relaxed. So I really appreciate you saying that. I think, I'm like recovering from a concussion, and so like I've been spending a lot more time just going, what can I not do? And then a good friend yesterday said, in fact, she gave me, look at my earrings.
Those are beautiful. I was looking at them.
They're real flowers.
Wow. So
they're temporary. They're temporary earrings.
Yes.
They're from Mari Rose Taruk. She makes these beautiful creations, and she made this set for me. And so she said to me yesterday, actually, she said, we should strive to underachieve. I was like, yes, we need to like think about not always like production. And I said to her, I said, that underachieving, if I like took at the level of like work and achievement and that we always do as women of color, right? That my underachievement would still be better than a mediocre white man.
Wait, say that again, more slowly.
My underachievement would still be better than the level of a mediocre white guy.
Yeah. So that's fine then, right?
Yes.
That's permission to underachieve. You'll still get it all done.
We still get it all done. That's right. So for everybody else who's joining us too, why don't you drop in the chat the ways that you're nourishing yourself so that we can all hear so that we know that we're all taking care of each other and we're taking care of ourselves too. Nourishing yourself could also be nourishing other people in the ways that that's happening. My nourishment these days has been accepting love and support. Um, I'm a single parent, so it's like I'm always, and I'm the ED of this organization, so oftentimes I'm like orchestrating and moving and doing all of the things. I'm always helping other people. I love that Michaela said spending more time in the sun. And so like accepting that help has been I thought I had worked on that for myself, and like accepting help and asking for help. And so that has been my practice of nourishment, is accepting love and support from people while I'm healing. And Michaela spends her time in the sun gardening. I love it. I love it, gardening. Michaela works for Bandung Books, right?
She is the bookstore coordinator. I'm sure she's like, how does Elena on this IG live? What did I did it. Liz talked me through it.
I did. Well, tell everybody, Elena, tell everybody the way that you did mention a little bit. So EastSide Arts Alliance. So let's go back. So the Redistricting Commission was created in 2014 as a result of, you're getting props from Michaela, in 2014, there was a ballot measure that passed that created a public redistricting commission, right? And Oakland Rising and a bunch of other groups and organizations like really helped to move that through and created that. And the reason why that's important to know is because previously redistricting happened at city council. And so oftentimes it was sort of behind doors, there was obviously an infrastructure there through the city council process, but they often would, the city council members did it sometimes in their own interest, on the interest of behalf of maybe other lobbying interests, maybe corporations, maybe their own bid for mayor, all kinds of different things in terms of moving that. And so the Redistricting Commission, this is the first time, our first public commission. So it was a little messy, to say it nicely. But the process is one where then we had commissioners from all over the city come, and they spent about through the final process, it was close to 20 something months, right? Mm-hmm. Where then they learned about redistricting, they learned about race and equity and ways that what they need to do to move this along. And one of them was to make sure we're doing outreach. And so that's how Eastside and you and Dr. AC got involved, right?
Yes.
So what were the things that you all did around the outreach? You all came on once to talk about redistricting.
Yeah, and I just want to say to some of the stuff that you just said, Liz, the process that the commissioners had to go through to learn about districting, or why districts matter, why drawing lines matter, bigger concepts like why maybe segregation is better than integration, or these kind of concepts of communities of interest, was a real learning process, and not just for the commissioners, for all of Oakland. I think like one of the biggest takeaways I got from this is like, we need a super more robust civics education in the public schools. Like I'm saying, start with the 10-year-olds now. and when we do this redistricting again, they'll be 20 years old, and it'll be just more common knowledge on how government works, how you can have an input in it, how especially drawing lines work. So yeah, one of the things the city in the kind of face of race and equity to be more fair, wanted to make sure that folks who had not previously been participating in things like this, like calling in and being a part of the city meetings, were reached, so we put together, myself working with Dr. AC and Outreach by Design and her students, a plan to just like go to Dia de los Muertos and go to Acoma Market and do pop-ups in Chinatown, and kind of hit folks where folks are gathering already. And this is a strategy that we're now working on with Oakland's general plan. So it's
Right.
kind of connected to that, like going to what I call Oakland's cultural hubs, and
Right.
it was it's just I thought it was very fulfilling. And we of course I didn't, but they did, like a whole social media strategy and all of that as well,
Mhm.
and partnering with groups like Oakland Rising, especially around the education stuff.
Yeah.
What I appreciated so much about Oakland Rising was just calling in on every item at every meeting with data, like with
Yeah.
information that everybody needed to hear. That was so critical, and
Right.
so much part of that whole civics education slot.
Yeah, because I feel like, the redistricting commissioners did do a lot about like learning about the process, but I don't think, they relied really heavily on the census data, and census data was flawed. We're starting to now see news reports talking about that. We knew it was going to be flawed when Trump started really going after, and saying like, what he would do with the data, right? Like he really put a lot of fear in immigrant communities, right, around it. It was a botched process. He really screwed it up with the Census Department, at the federal level, and so they not only got late start on it. It was in the middle of a pandemic, so I'll give it that. But like, we went from having like certain parts of Oakland, when we look at the census tracts, like it's like the city is cut up into these little boxes all over the city, and those are called census tracts. And so when we looked at particular census tracts, we saw that we went from, like, say, for example, Chinatown in 2010 had a response rate of 75%, a little over 75%, and this time was at like 55%.
Mm.
So you have now like 25% of the population on top of the 25 that was already not participating before. You now have like almost 50% of Chinatown not telling you who's in Chinatown. And that's problematic because that means like funding at the federal level coming into Chinatown will be less, right? Because then we're undercounted. There's not a clear picture of the actual need. So you don't have an actual picture of like how many homeless folks, how many, undocumented folks possibly, or I'm not undocumented, but like how many like immigrant folks, how much language needs. Those things all get calculated into federal and state dollars towards services that come into your community. So those then get sent to the state, that get sent to the county, that get sent to the city, right? So there's like a whole process around this. We knew that that was going to be flawed. And we knew that regardless, census data doesn't actually give us a real clear picture of the electoral power in Oakland,
Mm.
right? So one of those is like who donates to campaigns is one, who votes, how they vote, who they're voting for, what are they voting on, also make a really big difference. And so we were beginning to see like a need and an advocacy that moved us away from thinking about what you said earlier. And I want to go back to it, is the difference between like segregation, right? And what was the other word that you said?
Just just the opposite, segregation
Right.
versus integration, and
Integration, that's it. And that, we think about segregation as being a negative thing, but in fact, oftentimes there is a lot of power in spaces when you have when you look at historical ethnic enclaves, for example, Chinatown, for example, the Fruitvale, for example, where do we see a large populations of Black voters, right? Those are important things for us to know. And where do, what kind of policies really impact those communities? And those were the data pieces that the commissioners weren't really looking at, but that we were looking at.
Yeah, and that, I mean, in this, you can see how important it is to have that type of power, the type of power that is the folks that are going to be pulling down the funds to support housing development or job opportunities or healthcare or the cultural infrastructure. You
Right.
want to make sure that they're representing your interests, and you can see that, you know, that burgeoning work right now with the Black Cultural Zone in East Oakland. You know, like the things that the Black Cultural Zone has on their list of needs, they have to be the force, and the representatives have to be representing them. You know, and I don't know if you want to get into that whole Hills debate, but it was just a, you know, it got into a thing.
Let's get into it.
I just like, will the people who live in the Hills who have different interests be the ones that are going to really lobby for the folks in the flatlands who have different sets of interests?
That's right.
You know, and maybe it makes more sense to separate those communities of interest. But when people saw that map, it just rang as up. The rich people are just taking everything and they're having their own thing. And, you know, it just rubbed people, the visceral reaction to the looking at it wasn't right. And then the city brought in technical consultants who were doing all the mapping, and I actually appreciated them because they too brought a lot of information. They were not from Oakland, and Oaklanders already are suspect like that.
Let's get to that, right? Like, Oaklanders are like, what? Why are you coming and telling me what's best for me, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was just, you know, that it was hard then to hear the facts that they were talking about and how they were, you know, kind of making a case for, you know, sometimes it's best to have your grouping be who represents you.
Right. Exactly. And I think like that goes back to what you were saying earlier, which is that like civics education is so important, right? Because you know, the ways in which like redlining and segregation really do happen. And district lines have been used to do that. For example, you know, like using freeway lines to divide communities. And the way that, like, for example, I know the folks at the, you know, in West Oakland, oh God, I can't remember the organization though. His name is David Price. Sure. West Oakland Community Action Network, is that what they are? They were talking about like the ways in which, like, for example, his family living in West Oakland had the 580 cut right through his family, his grandparents' home. Like, his home was demolished for a freeway to come in. And so those are like real visceral reactions that people have when they see lines, right? Because we know that those type of lines have been used to really target and hurt people and hurt communities, right? And so I think like there felt like it was a need to address that, but there was no time. You know, because that takes a lot of time and care when you talk about the impact of racial injustice, right? Like the ways in which systematic racial injustice has been inflicted on people, and they feel it. Like, we just think about it like, oh, it's a theoretical thing. But that theoretical thing actually resulted in someone losing their home.
Yeah.
Right? And then what does that mean? It theoretically turns into like disenfranchisement, and disinvestment turns into 8,000 people living on the streets of Oakland. Like,
Exactly.
so I think understanding that process was also part of the redistricting education that needed to happen, but we didn't have the time to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the cynic in me, or the conspiracy theorist in me, says, it's probably it behooves some politicians and folks to keep people kind of not questioning stuff.
Right.
So the knowledge just, it's there's not enough of an investment made to offer people that kind of power, so I think
That's right.
we just have to grab it.
Yeah, and there's also, I think also one of the things that's tricky about Oakland, right, is because it has such a strong history in, like, a strong revolutionary, strong social justice history movement, that a lot of people sort of just think that if you're a person of color, that you are aligned with certain things,
Mm-hmm.
and we know not all kinfolk are, not all kinfolk are skin folk, or is it all skin folk are kinfolk, whichever way it goes. But like, that we know that, oftentimes, like, I was talking with, engaging with somebody in the community about it, and they were like, well, I represent these many people of color. And I was like, oh, that's wonderful. That's great. And then when we got into it a little deeper, I was like, oh, because you represent homeowners. I was like, so Oakland Rising is working with a lot of tenants, right? Like, a lot of our partner organizations members are renters. And in fact, the majority of Oakland are renters, right? And so, and the majority of the Flatland residents are renters.
Mm-hmm.
So there's then the nuance where then you see this is a class difference, and that the interests, your private interests as a homeowner, are different than, say, the next level of folks who are more disenfranchised, or renters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is not something that, like, as a process through the redistricting, like, I kept thinking through this process, I was like, oh, I wish that we had engaged in this process actually 2 to 3 years prior. Mm-hmm. So that you start talking about it to folks, you start talking about what is the census, and why is the census important, why is redistricting important, and then actually building from the ground up a map that could have just been completely different. I mean, I started thinking, Elena, at one point I was like, we have mostly the districts are going up and down from, right, east to west. And I say up and down meaning hills to the flatlands. And I was like, what if it was this way? What if it was lateral? Would that change things? I wonder. But people are afraid of that level of change.
Yeah, and that was the thing too. It's like, I think if you look at Oakland realistically, you can see that some things need to change. So like, if you're not invested in trying to figure that out, because maybe things don't need to change where you are or where you sit,
Right.
but if this is one of the things I was kind of upset about, it was probably unrealistic to think, but I wished people were, during this whole redistricting process, were really looking at all of Oakland, like really looking at all of Oakland, and then maybe putting on a reparations lens, so you can look at all of Oakland through your reparations lens, and everyone would agree that everything needs to happen in the flatland communities. That's where the most need is. I mean, East and West Oakland, I mean, you can see the need. It's right there in your face. So that's where, like, folks put their commission hats on, and all their other, call-in hats, and say, okay, what can we change about these lines that might actually help where help is needed the most.
That's
You
right.
know, and unfortunately, we kind of came up with almost the same map. You know,
Almost. Almost.
there's some small things, and I appreciate that these conversations have started in earnest. You know.
Yeah. I'm gonna see if I could show this. Can you see this map, y'all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay. It's because I can't screen share on Instagram. But one of the big changes, so the colors, y'all, are our previous district lines. And these will go into place in January, I believe, right? Or it should be in place. They should be I have to figure that out. Why don't I know this in my head? When the redistricting maps get enacted, they should be now, because I know that they'll be moving on these with the elections. But one of the things here is that this District 1 used to be then very heavily like white voter population. What we called, if you ever listen to the redistricting commission, you might have heard the word CVAP, use the acronym CVAP. That means citizen voter age population. So we broke that down and they tried to emphasize and build stronger CVAP numbers for API, Black, and Latinx communities. And so one way that happened was in District 1 here. They moved this large portion of the hills into D4, which created sort of pseudo hills only district. It's not true to that completely, but it is moving towards that. And one thing that everyone should know, I know that some say that this doesn't really impact that, but I think it does, is that a majority of those of who give the most money in Oakland in campaign donations, individual donors, come from this portion of the hills. So they moved that out, and now District 1 has a much higher Black CVAP number. So there's a higher concentration of Black registered voters, which I think is a strong thing for District 1, you know? So maybe we might get, like, for example, you know, in 2024, that might switch where we might have a Black council member, right? Or a Black city school board director. Right now, that position has been held by white folks for quite a long time. So maybe the increased CVAP in Black population would change that. What's one other change that you saw, Elena, on this map, to this new map that you were like, whoa, that might change things?
Well, I mean, I appreciated the conversations folks were having around representation of the lake, which whenever I look at this map, I keep thinking Piedmont is the lake. It's like, no.
I'm gonna see if I could zoom in here, and then folks can actually see this a little better. Okay.
But there was talk to try and have one person represent all of the interests of the lake,
which is right here. Yeah, this is the lake right here. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, so it's still shared, you know, and that was I feel like that was a positive thing, because I don't think it's such a good idea to have one city council person making the decisions, or, you know, really representing the entire scope of the lake. It's too important of a community asset for Oakland.
And, you know, the one thing about that I think that I want to let folks know is that I think a lot of people just think that city council members only do policy and budgets, right? But in fact, like almost 85% of their office time is on constituent needs. And one of the biggest constituent needs that is around the lake is, and in many other parts of the city as well, is the unhoused population. And the needs of the unhoused are really great across the city. But the contention at the lake is the needs of the more affluent homeowners and renters, and and the needs of the unhoused, right? And so, and that the lake is one of those places that everybody in the city enjoys. Like everyone comes to the lake, right? They come for the farmers market, they come just for the beauty, to walk the lake, to use the lake. And there's lots of pop-up markets and things like that. And it has, during COVID too, we've seen like a real huge resurgence of like black markets that have popped up at the lake. And so there's been a lot of contentions around that, right? So like, y'all heard of Barbecue Becky. So that contention there is then actually handled by the city council members. And so I think that folks don't know that as well. So when you think about service needs, you also have to think about when you're looking at representation, you want to be able to have a council member not have to deal with such large issues all by themselves, because then if one council member, and I think there was a big move for folks to have council, the D2, District 2, be the main large portion of the lake, right? And so to hold the whole lake and the surrounding areas. And so it would have been all on one district council member to deal with all the unhoused issues, all the folks coming to the lake. And this way, it has 3 now. So I'm going to turn this around again. So you can see here, it used to just be mainly D3 and D2 who were around the lake, but now D1 is a portion of that, of Adams Point is now included, and parts of Westlake are included in D1 more largely, and that was a big fight for a lot of folks. There was a lot of unhappy folks at the end of the day too around that. So was there anything else that you wanted to point out that you thought that folks wanted, were, if you remember from the conversations?
Well, the kind of what is an economic engine and how does it benefit or not benefit the specific district was, again, a point that I don't feel like there was enough clarity around. I mean, I even don't have enough clarity around that. And it came up specifically around the Coliseum. And
Right.
is the Coliseum in District 6 or District 7? And it was a, I felt like that was a very sad fight, and a lot of folks were unhappy about what happened. And I went away thinking, I'm just not super sure what benefit the Coliseum had been in the past for District 7. I mean, I don't feel like it was that. Again, this is one of the most in need districts, and if this is like some amazing economic engine, it seems like there shouldn't be so much need. But like I'm saying, I know there's education I need from that, but I went away kind of hoping that whatever benefit the Coliseum turns out to be, and then think about the port and the airport, and these are the economic engines of Oakland. The port, I think, more than the Coliseum, but maybe it'll get to that, should be benefiting, again, where there's the most need. It's not just because of that it's the Coliseum, which may turn out to be a huge cash cow, is only going to benefit District 6 when District 7 still has unmet needs, or
That's right.
So.
So just so folks know, it didn't move any real population because they just moved this right here, this little corner here is, if you can see right here, I don't know if you can see the pointer, but that is just the Coliseum complex and nobody lives there. So they moved it from District 6 to District 7. There was a lot of questions about the current council member, Lauren Taylor from District 6, him publicly advocating both on his Facebook and his newsletter and at the Acoma Market directly to redistricting commissioners to advocate to push it there. So there was a lot of questions about that. And I think there might be some ethics commission like complaints that will go in regarding it possibly. But during the process too, there was like a need to, we need to do, the process is finish the map and then file your complaint. And it doesn't necessarily impact the actual map itself, but it would impact against the city council member himself for not, he shouldn't have been advocating specifically for anything for his district because this was part of the public commission.
But Liz, can you, I mean, no, that's all to be seen, but can you give a little short, how does it benefit or not benefit either D6 or D7, the Coliseum's placement?
Well, it's really complicated, right? Because the Coliseum itself is owned by half by the city, half by this county. There's a lot of like economic development projects and needs around the Coliseum that are trying to be addressed, and the impact of like the environmental impact of the Coliseum, you know, people going to the Coliseum, that impacts the neighborhoods, you know, also thinking about like what kind of economic development projects are getting put in place. And a big piece of it really is about thinking about like the impact fees and the taxation of the land that could potentially go to future developments. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest concerns that I think we at Oakland Rising have is looking at the easement, the ways that the easement of those taxes are happening. And what that easement would do is actually bring more real estate development in. But with the way the city is moving, you know, they just put out a housing report saying that, you know, Libby Schaaf's administration has failed to create enough affordable housing units in Oakland, and in fact has created too much at market rate housing, and that potentially this is one of those places where, you know, the easement of those taxes, both at the federal and state and county and city levels, is actually going to just try to promote development that's actually not affordable. And so what the impact of this potentially could have is more displacement of residents in Deep East Oakland. That when you look at, you know, I can't remember the name of the organization, but they do a map of where displacement is most at danger, right? Where the risk is high. We are seeing that districts 5, 6, and 7 are the highest. So yes, it is important, but not the way that people are thinking. A lot of people are thinking like this is going to come here and this money is going to result in coming into our district, and that's just not how that works. Mm-hmm. Projects and other things in that district come through the city budget, like services come through the city budget that is just allocated across the city. So that's on your city council member right? And so why representation is important is because then if you have a city council member, and this is one going back to like the Hills only thing, right? Is like, for example, District 6, the council member lives in the Hills, right? And so how much interest does he have in, you know, the interest of homeowners, the interest of corporations, the interest of these things, rather than flatland residents who are like, our interest is housing, our interest is safe streets, our, you know, clean streets, parks, libraries, investment in our community. And does he represent, or does the city council member, or even the school board director actually represent our community, right? The interests of our community. So like, for example, Shanti Gonzalez is District 6 school board director, and she voted to, you know, she was a big part of pushing for school closures, even though at the end she abstained in her vote, which was kind of a chicken shit way to get herself out of it. But like, you know, like that, that's what redistricting is really about, right?
Yeah.
Is about who are we getting to represent us in these places and the interests of the people who live there. So having this complex in one side or the other is really complicated and simple, right? It's complicated because I think our understanding about what it does for your district is, it's all, where a lot of people don't understand it. They don't understand development because we are left out of the conversation, so we don't understand it, right? So the majority of us don't actually understand what, you know, easement of taxation does for development, for corporations, blah, 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 right? And then the impact of that in our community is that we have more environmental injustice, more environmental racism, we have more displacement, we have, right, housing insecurity, we have all of these things that we have then to contend with, which then goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is how these big systems actually impact our individual lives. Is really critical. And so
and just, I mean, and also just really thinking about council people and decision makers and their interests, you know, are they, and how, well, go back to like campaign finance reform. You know, it costs a lot to run a campaign. The folks that are going to be able to give you enough to run your campaign, are you going to be okay to go back to them and demand taxes and regulations and restrictions on their work? You know, it's just, are you willing to do that? And so that's why we have to kind of, I know Oakland Rising is getting ready to work on some of that, but
I know, thank you for that. Thank you for that.
That was a nice little, you know, it's like how if you represent, even at a simplest form, you know, homeowners, you're not going to get their vote if you step out and say, I'm going to increase your taxes.
That's right.
You know, so, but that's exactly what needs to happen if you're representing, you know, the whole city and the needs of the whole city.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that are coming up that y'all folks should know about, and continue to watch Oakland Rising Monday Meals. We're going to come up on time. I'm just going to start wrapping us up. Is that look out for future conversations about the progressive business tax that's coming to Oakland. That will change our flat business tax rate, and will help to have our corporations pay their fair share. And this could potentially bring about $40 million to the city. PG&E and Blue Shield, Blue Cross, they are up against it. They are possibly going to try to do their own business tax measure that will benefit them and not benefit, small businesses. So keep an eye out for that. That's one thing to watch out for. You know, PG&E and Blue Shield throw down hard for some of the neoliberal candidates in Oakland. So, you know, be mindful of that. You know how PG&E does California, how they've done us wrong and burned out our city, our state. I mean, and then on the other side to that is democracy dollars. You can go to Fair Elections Oakland. and learn more about it. But basically, it's going to bring hopefully have a ballot measure where we'll get to vote on it. And if it passes, it would give 4 $25 vouchers to every eligible donor anybody, you might not be a voter, but you can still donate to a campaign. And this will give you direct, you can give it directly to any candidate you want. But what that does is it gets the grassroots candidates, the people from your community. Now you don't have to worry about, I got to run this huge campaign to get hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars from Lyft, who gave about $150,000 in the last campaign against Rebecca Kaplan, right? That's a huge amount of money. $150,000 from Bloomberg to District 4 Gary Yee candidate, right? And he's totally for the charters. He also was spearheading to the closures. After the closures, was found with a developer at one of our school sites. So, you know, like, our city's being sold, and this is the moment where we need to see more equitable democracy policies in place, including campaign finance. So check that out. Go to Fair Elections Oakland so you can learn about what that is and how you can get involved. We'll be doing a lot more activities. You can go to our Facebook page. We just did a launch of the campaign, so you can learn more about that. So all of these things, redistricting is not an island to itself. Campaign finance is not an island to itself. All of these things are really integrated. So, and including the general plan. And I think, Elena, either you or some other folks will bring other folks on to talk about the general plan and what that means.
That's Oakland 2045.
Yeah.
Someone said, is that an address? It's like, no, it's a year. We're going to get there.
Yeah, so we'll talk more about that. But this was so, I always love spending time with you, Elena, just chopping it up with you.
Yes. Thank you, Liz. I love you too.
I do too. So let's have lunch at Miss Ollie's soon.
Yes.
So I'll reach out to you. But thank you everybody for joining, and go get that lunch and do that nourishment of your body, minds, and spirits. Bye. Have a good day.